demands of space. There's a wild new frontier.
You got a problem, Red Eye?
Yeah, I got a problem.
Where the good guys are only human.
You get out of town, or I'll kill you. You ain't gonna kill nobody.
And the bad guys are not.
We're gonna show the good people of Oblivion the great advantages to a town run by Red Eye.
Where the liquor's hard.
Jim, beam me up.
And the women are wild.
Delicious.
And the natives are on the warpath.
Great Scotty!
Because in this town, it's not cowboys and Indians.
Not so fast, Pocahontas.
It's cowboys and aliens.
We're getting a posse together.
Who's with me?
My family's spirits cry out to be avenged.
I love the way this guy talks!
Is that a fact?
Definitely.
Oblivion. It's high noon in outer space.
Well, hey, everybody. You're listening to a podcast. This podcast is called BAM the Pod. It's an acronym. It means Movie Brothers. We are brothers in real life, and we talk about movies. Some of them are bad action movies. Some of them are just kind of movies. My name is Braden Warts, and I am here, as always, with my brother, Brian.
Hello.
Hey. So we have another movie to discuss. The listeners or viewers, if they're watching us on the YouTube, probably know what we are going to be talking about because we usually put a trailer up and we also put it in the title. But the movie's called Oblivion, and it's not that Tom Cruise movie. It's another movie.
Oh, that's the one I watched. It was bad too, though.
I've never actually seen that movie. So
no, I haven't.
It probably is.
I may have seen it, but if I did, I forgot it.
Yeah, good. It's like most of the late Scientology films of Mr. Cruise. They kind of are forgettable. He's a good actor, but he annoys the hell out of me.
Sure.
So I kind of gave up on him a while ago. That's a total sidebar. Now we are going to talk about Oblivion. I mentioned that in our last podcast on Blade, but we were actually able to track down the sequel, Oblivion 2. Did you have a chance to watch
Backlash?
That one? Yeah. Did you watch that one?
I sort of watched it.
Okay. I had a chance to watch that, so I think we can discuss that a little bit as well.
Yeah, it was on. I'm not sure if it mattered if I watched it or not.
Yeah, that's actually going to be a talking point for me. So
okay.
So put that thought on pause right there because I'm right there with you. But another talking point is going to be the stream service, Full Moon movie stream service, which is something that both you and I have been watching a lot of. We just got a year's subscription to it. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I think you are as well.
Yeah, Full Moon streaming. It's Full Moon Pictures. They do a lot of weird self-produced, I don't know if they're self-funded or not. They probably have people they raise money to make these weird movies, but they make a lot of weird movies with weird puppets and weird dolls and weird things in general.
Yeah, and I kind of found out about them through this film, Oblivion.
Oh, okay.
That and Tubi. And we've talked about Tubi before. This film, Oblivion, is available on Tubi if you have that app. It has commercials on it. But they do have a lot of the Full Moon features on Tubi. So that kind of got me in the back door. And then you and I began to dialogue. And I'm like, hey, a lot of these are this Full Moon company. They actually have their own streaming service. And so we got the membership. And I'm like I said, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I kind of feel like they have like three types of film. Well, they have a lot of types of films. But they basically have like, it's all camp. It's all like, B-rate camp. for sure, which we love, so it's great. But you kind of have like the horror camp, you have the sci-fi camp, and then you have like the softcore porn camp. Those are kind of and they kind
pretty
of
much their bread and butter.
That's their niche, if you will. And they kind of also have the amalgamation of any one of those. Like you could have like a sci-fi softcore porn campy movie, or like a horror softcore porn camp, or just a horror sci-fi camp, or there's any mix you want to make, they're there. And the fun thing about it is you never actually know what you're gonna get. You just
you never know what level of like quality it might be.
Yeah.
And I don't mean quality in terms of like production value or whatever, but honestly, all the movies I've watched of theirs, I've enjoyed in some way, shape, or form, in some sense or another. Some of them I was very impressed. Like, this is actually a pretty good movie. Others are like, this is terrible, but I love it.
Yes.
So I haven't been disappointed. So yeah, check them out on Tubi, or there's actually an Amazon channel. You can subscribe to their service through Amazon if you don't want to see the commercials on Tubi. Or they have a really good deal on their streaming service that you can get on their website, and they actually give you a bunch of free movies, Blu-rays, DVDs, a gift card, and stuff for signing up. So they're not promoting this in any way. We're just promoting it because we've been enjoying it.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're a person who likes bad action movies or just bad movies in general, this is definitely a group of people who are putting out films that you're gonna go crazy for, because there's just a treasure trove of bad movies.
It's true, and it's been great to discover too, like some of the directors that have been involved in these movies have been directors from other movies that we've talked about.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to mention, because if you're listening to this when this podcast first comes out, they're doing this thing starting this summer called, I want to say it's called the Deadly 10, where they're actually filming 10 movies. And they're live streaming the filming process of all these movies. Were you aware of this?
I saw the ad for it on the webpage, but I did not know that they're doing. But they do a lot of cool things like this.
Yeah, they're just doing some unique things, and they make really weird movies. And they're pretty shameless about the fact that, we know these are strange, weird movies, and that's what we do. So.
Yeah, there's no illusions, and all the cards are on the table, and it's just good campy fun. And you got to go in knowing it tongue in cheek, that they're not taking it seriously. And when you do that, you'll actually find that some of these movies are more enjoyable than probably the Tom Cruise Oblivion movie that they spent bazillion dollars making, no one liked, or maybe somebody did.
A lot of these movies, probably because they're just trying to get them out there. If you're a fan of Riff Tracks, who are some of the guys that used to do Mystery Science Theater, you can buy video on demand versions of a lot of their movies they've done on Riff Tracks, where they do like the joke commentaries, Mystery Science Theater type commentaries over the movies. So those are pretty fun ways to watch them too.
Yeah, so that's just a little plug. Like you said, we don't get anything for that, but we've just been enjoying it. So I wanted to mention it to our listeners, because if they're out there, they would probably get something from it as well. But like I said, Oblivion, the first movie, is on Tubi. The second is not available, at least on any of the stream services that I have seen, but it is, of course, on the Full Moon stream service. So that's a nice thing about that particular stream service, is if you find a film that they made that you like, it probably has a sequel, because they made like so many sequels of like every film they make like more, because there's a low production value and they already have an audience. So you can find all the sequels to those films on their actual stream service. And so we'll talk a little bit about the second film as well. But before we get into the film, we like to have a drink while we talk about these things. It's kind of our thing. Sometimes we drink a lot. Sometimes we drink a little. Sometimes we come up with really clever, elaborate drinks. Sometimes we just drink. Yeah. And I think tonight's more of just let's just drink. But why don't you tell me what you got, and then I'll give a little bit about my beverage.
I did not. I usually like to make a cocktail, and I usually try to tie it in the movie, and maybe it's just laziness on my part, but you know how life goes sometimes. So I just decided to grab something that I wanted to drink tonight that I had in my fridge. It's called White Claw Hard Seltzer. Have you ever had any of these hard seltzers? They're kind of trendy right now.
Well, I don't drink the carbonated beverages.
That's
no.
true. You don't.
Mm.
So basically, I'm sure you're familiar with LaCroix
Yes.
and the like, the bubbly and the LaCroix and all those types of sort of the carbonated, lightly fruity flavored seltzer waters.
Yes.
Well, this is basically just an alcoholic version of that. And there's a lot of different brands that have come out recently, and I've been enjoying them just because they're very just lightly carbonated, and you can get them in a lot of like different tropical flavors. This is the White Claw Black Cherry. They don't have a lot of alcohol. It's just only 5%. But the thing about it that I really like is they're super low calorie and super low sugar. So I've got like the large, single, it's probably like a 20-ounce size can. And it's got less than 200 calories and like 3 grams of sugar in the whole thing. So it's very like, I guess if you're being health conscious, which I try to be, it's sort of like a healthier sort of little cocktail you can have. And it's just sort of lightly carbonated and fruity, and I like it.
I have 2 questions. What
Yeah.
alcohol content? Is it like similar to like a beer probably?
Yeah, it's probably considered a beer product. It's like 5%.
Okay.
So
Now the second question is, does it have like a fruit flavor?
yeah, so they make a lot of different flavors, and there's a lot of different other brands that I've tried too. This is just what I had today. So they tend to be on the fruitier flavors, like the cherry or the grapefruit, or I had one that was like a clementine that was really good. That was a spiked. There's another brand called Spiked Seltzer that's also good. And so if you like that kind of thing, like LaCroix, like if you wish your LaCroix was alcoholic, or I suppose if you wanted to make maybe a mojito or something like that, you could substitute one of these maybe for your tonic water in it. Or you could maybe spike it a little bit more with some tequila. I've gotten the lemon lime and maybe just add a little tequila to it to give it a little bit of something extra.
That makes sense.
It's pretty good. So yeah, they're good. I like them. So if you've tried any of these kind of spiked seltzer type drinks that you have enjoyed, and when I say you, I know you don't drink the carbonated beverages, but the people who are watching or listening, maybe tell me the ones that you like so I can give them a try, because I've been sort of trying different ones lately. It's nice in the summer. It's getting hot out here now. So I'm even got my BAM tank top on.
Yeah, looks good.
I don't know if you can see, but maybe a little bit. And it's nice in the hot weather to have something kind of just crisp and refreshing. And it's just very lightly alcoholic, so I probably won't get too buzzed off of this, but just maybe a little bit tonight.
There you go. Now, I've never had a LaCroix either because of the fact that I don't drink the carbonated beverages, but at least according to internet memes, I've heard it described as if you're drinking carbonated water and someone just screamed out a fruit from like another room.
That's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Like someone's in the living room that
accurate.
just yells like watermelon. You're like, wait, what? Watermelon?
Yeah, it's basically like you read the label and like, oh, okay, I get that. It's like it's just a hint.
Right, yeah, it's very subtle.
Yeah.
So my drink, I put a little thought into it, but I didn't make a cocktail. Sometimes I do. A lot of times I just have whiskey. And that's what I did tonight. So the thing about this movie Oblivion, and obviously we will go into more discussion about it, but it is a sort of Western, right, of sorts. It's
definitely a Western.
It's a combination of science fiction and a Western. It's taking those two genres and melding them together into a film, but it definitely has a very Western flair. So, of course, there is like a brothel and a saloon where they go. Now, I don't think that they're drinking probably whiskey per se because they're in outer space and they're supposed to be another species of people. But that's a type of drink that they would drink. So I think that, usually in a Western, that's what they're drinking. They drink whiskey.
Sure.
So that's what I like. So I was trying to think if I could like put a sci-fi spin on it, because I'm like, well, I've got the whiskey for the Western, and I couldn't really come up with anything. I was thinking like, what would be like a sci-fi drink? I was thinking like Romulan maybe I could like mix it with like some kind of like blue Gatorade or something, but I didn't have any blue Gatorade. That also kind of sounded gross to mix like whiskey with blue Gatorade. So I'm just like, I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to go with whiskey, but I'm going to choose a whiskey I haven't used before on the show. It's a whiskey I've had in my cabinet for a while, as you'll soon see if you're watching. And I thought this was the perfect choice for this movie, and here's why. Now, as I mentioned, it's got a bit of a Western flair, this film, but it's very much in the sci-fi genre as well. And one of the people I think who's going to be a main talking point of this is the writer, Peter David, of our podcast, I should say, because we're a fan of his work. And Peter David is a big sci-fi guy, right? He's a big Star Trek guy. He's even written for them and things like that. So, and there's also, of course, anytime you get into this genre of film making, there's always certain underlying Star Wars motifs, right? And those are the Star Trek and Star Wars are kind of the big science fiction stalwarts, that they're the standard by which people are kind of trying to meet. And I think that's definitely, you feel that in this film. So I was thinking, well, we've all heard of Star Wars. We've all heard of Star Trek. But how many people have actually heard of Oblivion? Oblivion is like the off-shelf generic label version of like a Star Trek or a Star Wars. So I have a visual here if you're watching this. I just want you to see this. The size of this bottle. Can you see how big this bottle is?
That's a very large bottle. And I noticed it's like mostly empty.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I've had this in my liquor cabinet for a while because you can see, yes, it is almost empty. This bottle is so big that it won't even fit in my cabinet with any of the other bottles. It's so tall. So I had to have a special spot on the counter. And the reason that is the case, and it didn't always have this bottle. I don't know why they changed this, but this is the Kirkland signature brand Scotch whiskey. Now, are you familiar with Kirkland's signature?
Kirkland, I believe, is the Costco brand.
Yeah. Yes. It is Costco whiskey right here that I have, and it's a giant bottle. So I thought that was kind of appropriate that I'm not drinking a mainline big label. I'm drinking the off-brand Costco label because this is kind of the off-brand Costco sci-fi film, science fiction western, Oblivion. I will say this as well, which is another good talking point. Just because it's an off-brand. Just because it's not the the big label with all the advertising and all the marketing doesn't mean it's not good.
Right.
And I would say that's true of not only the Oblivion films, but also a lot of the Full Moon films that we mentioned previously. But it's also true of this Scotch whiskey. This is actually a 12-year blended Scotch, and it's aged in oak. And it's actually, again, I'm not usually a blend guy. I talked about that on another episode. But there are a few blends I will drink. One of them I talked about was White Horse, which is a very cheap but yet very good blend. This also is a very affordable. I think this bottle was only maybe $30-something.
Wow.
It's huge. And it's a 12-year-old aged Scotch blend. And it's actually really, really good. Definitely worth the money. Again, if you can see, it's not got a fancy label or anything like that. And the other thing about Costco too is, and I don't know, I'm not sure, but they usually get their stuff from another supplier that is a big name supplier.
Sure. And
then they just put a label on it. It tastes like Chivas to me, Scotch, which it could be. I don't know. They can't say what it is, but
I think what you need for that, especially since we're talking about a Western movie, is you need some sort of strap for that bottle where you can just strap it to your back or something.
Just carry it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just put it on a saddle, ride around on a horse.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, anyways, I thought that was pretty funny. I'm gonna use the off-brand. It's appropriate for a full moon film.
Right.
So.
Right. And watching this movie, you might think to yourself, "Oh, I get it. It's sort of a cheap ripoff of Cowboys and Aliens." You mentioned Star Trek and Star Wars, but my first thought was Cowboys and Aliens, the Daniel Craig movie.
Right.
that came out a while back. But this movie predates that by a lot of years, actually. This movie came out in, I want to say, 1994 or something like that.
And the same thing, too, could be said of Firefly. Because it's like, oh, it's kind of like a cinematic version of Firefly, which was a Joss Whedon television series that has a huge cult following. Joss Whedon, for people who don't know, well, he's done a lot of stuff because he's been involved with a lot of the comic book films of late. But of course, in the 90s was known for the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series. But this would predate that as well, because 94 was like right when Buffy was just kind of getting in its, of momentum, full momentum. So, this would precede Firefly as well. So this is kind of I don't want to say inventive, because I'm sure there's been sci-fi. I mean, even Star Wars has a Western feel to it, if you think about it, to a certain extent. I mean,
true. Well, it's
this
more
one
it's based really more off of like samurai movies, which in turn sort of turned into Western movies.
Right, and those were sort of based off American Westerns, like Akira Kurosawa. So there's a sort of a long cycle. So, but yeah, I mean, this film does, like you said, it does kind of precede a lot of those ones that have been very clearly like, we're going to make a Western in space. So I did like it for that reason as well. But one of the talking points that we want to talk about, or at least I want to talk about, is Peter David, because I have an anecdote. And I want to see if you remember this, because it involves you more than me. And you probably have an anecdote or two, because you've met Peter David a handful of times.
A couple times, several times, maybe 3 or 4 times. Yeah.
So for people who are unfamiliar with Peter David, besides writing weird science fiction films like this, low budget science fiction films, he did he did write for Star Trek. I think maybe Babylon. Did you do Babylon 5 or I don't know. He's done a lot of science.
J. Michael Straczynski. He wasn't Babylon 5, but
maybe it was
he wrote a lot of
or something. I don't know. I thought he'd done some other shows besides Star Trek. But no, am I wrong on that?
He's done a lot of comic books.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. I can pull him up while we're looking. But yeah, I know he's done a lot of comics. And my earphones came out. One of the ones that he wrote, that's one of your favorite comic series, is the series Spider-Man 2099.
Yes. He's also really well known for a run he did on the Hulk, I believe.
Yep. I saw that as well. Yeah, I have his Wikipedia page up right here in front of me. I'm going to scroll up because I did think he did. So he did, Incredible Hulk. He's an Aquaman, Young Justice, Supergirl, Fallen Angel, Spider-Man 2099, X Factor. But I think he did. He did do Babylon 5. He did do some work for Babylon 5. That's what I was thinking of. Okay, but the story I want to tell is, and if you're watching, there's some visuals here, is about this.
Oh, you got it. You pulled it out.
So last week, I on the Blade Trinity episode, I showed some of my comic collection on the video feed. So I thought it was appropriate that I do that again today. So what I'm holding in my hand for the non-viewing audience is a Spider-Man 2099 #1 with the foil cover, which was a very popular thing in the 90s, right? When they're like, we're gonna make a #1 full cover. Now, this is signed by Peter David.
Yep.
You got this signature, and if I remember, it was actually at a Star Trek convention.
It was. I went to a Star Trek convention, my first time ever going to a convention like that, and he was one of the guests there. I really didn't know who he was, as far as a writer for Star Trek or whatever. I wasn't familiar with his work, but honestly, I just saw the Spider-Man 2099 comic book, and just the cover, the foil, the art on the front cover. I was just like, whatever this is, it's just spoke to me.
Like, I need that in my life.
On many levels. I'm thinking Spider-Man in the future, somebody did this. That sounds amazing. Come to find out that, they were kind of promoting it there because Peter David was a guest there. And I bought 2 copies, and I had them both signed. I could probably pull my copy out. It's actually in a binder behind me, but it's identical to yours for the most part.
For the most part,
right?
This is the anecdote, because I don't know if you remember this.
Oh, I remember. It's got a tear on it. Part of the foil came off.
On my copy, right where Peter David signed, I don't know if you can see it here. that's damaged because
Yeah.
where the D in his last name, and that's because I guess when Peter David pulled the comic book out of the bag and board, the tape got stuck on the foil cover.
It did.
And it came right off. So my comic is not meant anywhere near it now because of Peter David. Damn you, Peter David. But I guess I feel like it's the story alone is worth the price of admission.
Yeah, I have a very clear memory. This happened many years ago. When did that comic come out? Does it say? I'm guessing it was in the probably 93, 94 maybe.
It doesn't tell on the book. I mean, it would if I opened it up, but we can look it up.
But I have a clear memory of him pulling the comic out of the bag, and the tape where you fold the little flap grabbed the edge of the comic, and it peeled the foil off, and he kind of rubbed it and shrugged like, sorry, and signed it anyways. But
yeah, if I remember the story correctly, you'd bought one for yourself and one for me, and that was the one that was supposed to be yours. He was signing, and it got damaged, so you gave that one to me.
I don't know if that was necessarily true.
Maybe not.
I think that the person I was at the convention with, I had him get in line with me.
Gotcha.
And I had signed one at, and then I think he had the second one signed. So I don't know.
Either way, it was still nice that you got it for me. But there it is. It's not a particularly valuable book. These were these one issues, one outs with the foil covers. They probably printed millions of these because they knew that was when everyone thought comic books were going to be worth $1 million. But it's still a cool comic, and it's cool to have a signed and damaged comic by Peter.
And I said it, I think, on the last episode when we talked about we were going to do this movie. Spider-Man 2099 is my favorite Spider-Man. I think it's just because that's the one. It was a new character when I was a teenager, and I started from the beginning, and I read the series, and I bought it every week when it came to the comic shops. I kind of got back into comics at the time, and he's still a character that's in the Marvel universe.
Yep.
They still bring him back every once in a while. He's still popular enough that he shows up occasionally in video games and comics. Made a little sort of cameo in the Into the Spider-Verse animated movie. Hopefully we'll get maybe a sequel on down the road where maybe we'll see him some more. But Peter David wrote it. And they've even made some modern Spider-Man 2099 comics. They've brought the series back a few times too on occasion.
Yeah, so according to Wikipedia, it came out in 1992, which that sounds about right. Just a couple years before he would have released this film Oblivion, which is nice because it kind of gives me a time frame, like in my personal life, of where I was when this film would have been released. So I would have been about 12, 13 years old. You would have been a little bit older. But this is right around the time that I started to get interested in comics as well. So that's also why this is a really important comic, because I feel like this was one of the first comics I got that I was interested in. I read. And I, like you said, they were kind of like comic books always do. They sort of revamp and start new. So it's sort of like, oh, I don't know what's happening in Amazing Spider-Man because it's like 400 issues in or whatever. But this is new. I can start from the beginning and read. I didn't get into this character much, but I did get into the 2099 books. I was a big Punisher guy, and I read you would go to the comic store and you bought a lot of these, but I bought a lot of the Punisher. And I also got into the X-Men 2099.
Yep.
And I still have a bunch of those. So that's kind of just a fun trip down memory lane. If you're out there and you're kind of from our age bracket and you grew up reading comics, you'll most definitely remember these foil covered 2099 books because they were a big deal when they came out.
Yeah, they really kind of started to create, they wanted to sort of create this whole 2099 universe at the time. This was before they did like the Ultimates universe. Right. But it was sort of like a proto Ultimates, I guess, like this alternate universe 2099. And they introduced futuristic versions of a lot of their popular characters. And you can buy, like you said, they're not worth a lot. You can buy them very cheap. Bargain bin comics, but they're pretty fun to revisit. And that's not what this podcast is about today, but I still think people who listen to this would probably enjoy it. So
Yeah, cheers to 2099, Peter David. All right, well, let's talk about this film. I want to get your feel for the film overall, what your thoughts were, and then I obviously have some talking points I want to discuss too, but I want to hand it over to you first, just because I'm curious.
Right. So going into this movie, you can tell right away it's pretty low budget. The special effects, the costumes, all that's pretty cheesy. I've watched a lot of low budget movies, usually, especially ones in the 90s, tend to try to take themselves very seriously. Mm-hmm. But I think what I was not expecting and what I was pleasantly surprised about was this is really sort of a comedy. I mean, it's very tongue in cheek. There's lots of puns. There's lots of like inside jokes. Some of them kind of fall pretty flat, but some of them are pretty good. George Takei is in this movie, speaking of Star Trek, and he hams it up. Yep. I heard he does a lot of like Star Trek sort of jokes, which I heard were sort of ad-libbed. You've also got Julie Newmar, who you may know as Catwoman in the Adam West Batman series, and she plays Miss Kitty. So she has this kind of cat-like character. She's older in this movie. Yep. But it's definitely like a tongue-in-cheek sort of tribute to her Catwoman character. So just a lot of like sort of fun tongue-in-cheek humor. I really enjoyed the movie overall. It's a pretty fun movie. I mean, it is low budget and it is cheesy, but I think they knew that it was going to be that when they made the movie.
Yeah, I agree. I think they knew exactly what they were getting into, and I think it was in some ways probably intentional. It also has Meg Foster. Right. She plays like a cyborg. She's a kind of a, I don't know, I don't want to say notorious, but a very famed sort of B-rate movie star who shows up in a lot of these films, who's had a long career and doing films like this. And it also has Isaac Hayes. Yes. Of course, the famed soul singer, but also who would show up in places like Escape from New York, where he played the villain in that film. So, yeah, it's actually got a pretty solid cast. Even some of the other characters, like what's her name is? This is a fun name to say. Musetta Vander. She plays the Lash character. She's done just a ton of stuff. If you look at her, her kind of resume of films,
they've got a man called Gaunt. He's like the town's mortician, and sort of like whenever he shows up, somebody's about to die, kind of thing. It's sort of an inside joke. And he was in the Addams Family movies when they brought back the Addams Family in the 90s. Addams Family Values. He played Lurch in those movies. It's a lot of fun characters.
And you have Erwin Keyes, who plays Bork, who's also, you see him a lot in various, again, campy horror sci-fi films. He was in the Flintstone movies. He's in The Warriors. He played police in The Warriors, but he's a very much like a character actor. He has a really kind of weird look to him. He's in Black Dynamite too. I didn't even notice that. He's done a lot. But if you look up the film, you'll see it's a lot of familiar faces you've seen other places. But yeah, I actually like this film too, and I agree with you. When I put it on, I enjoyed it. So here's the thing that I would say about this too. Yeah, it was low budget. You have some people who are humanoid and just totally look human. Some people who are more like we have a cyborg character played by Meg Foster. But then you have some people who are like there's one guy, what's his name, Red Eye, who's kind of like almost reptilian looking, and he has like kind of like the rubber type, makeup and prosthetics and things on. You also have some monsters that are like stop motion animation, like old school, like Ray Harryhausen, Clash of the Titans type stuff. I actually absolutely loved that about this film because one, I could tell that the people making it, including Peter David, certainly had a respect and a love for those types of films. And they stuck with that and kind of kept that stylistic feel to the film, which was very much outdated by 1994. but I felt like it was an homage to those classic films and kind of gave it a sort of classic feel. And the point I want to make is this, because certainly at this point in time, CGI was present and being utilized, but it's very expensive. But here's the thing about CGI.
And it probably wasn't necessarily very good back then, unless you spent a whole lot of money.
This is one of my talking points. CGI is amazing. No question. I mean, the films that we see now in theaters, like the Marvel films that are out now, are covered with CGI. I mean, look at the way they make Josh Brolin into Thanos. It's incredible. There's no question about that. But you're exactly right. It's so expensive. And here's the thing to me. There is nothing worse and more, I would say, just like irritating and what completely ruins a film for me than bad CGI. Because there's a point where at that point, I feel like I'm not watching a live action film. I'm watching a video game or something, like not even a good video game. And it's like, at that point, why not just make it an animated film? I would enjoy like an old school, like cell animation film version more than this damn CGI crap that's terrible. So I actually liked the fact that rather than go to the computers and CGI it up, they actually just did old school, like old Hollywood, like let's just throw some prosthetics and rubber masks on people and let's just do some little stop motion animation creatures and, camera angles and like take it back to the old school, like horror camp sci-fi films, which I love. I love those old films.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons why I like this film, because I felt like there was because it was low budget, even though it came out in 1994, which now is a long time ago, but certainly, the 90s had progressed a long way since like the 50s and 60s when they had those types of kind of horror camp films. This still definitely had a very clear, I felt like, vision of trying to not only pay homage to it, but kind of make a film in that vein. And that's what I liked about it.
Yeah. And I think too, you can get away with having a pretty low budget to do something like a Western, because even the classic Westerns, I mean, a lot of it are just sort of facades, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're going to make a facade, a city of facades, so to speak, a Western is pretty easy way to go. So, I mean, the look of it holds up pretty good. And I guess we can maybe talk about sort of what the movie's about a little bit. Do you want to do that? Like just to sort of explain sort of what the movie is and.
Well, we can talk about both of them because and
right.
And then I'll get to another talking point I want to make about the overall feel or tone of both of these films. But yeah, I mean, essentially the first movie is about like we said, it's in outer space, and there's they sort of set that tone early when you see the town sign. There's this weird, strange like creature sitting on the sign, like, well, that's not from this planet, and that's when the Lurch character, who's kind of like Death, but he's the mortician from the town, is walking into the town, and yeah, I mean, you kind of have a cast of characters. There's a local brothel or bar where they hang out. Like you said, with a Western, you don't need a lot of props. You just need kind of a facade, city with a dirt road. And then, of course, everything else you can kind of film on set somewhere. Very inexpensive. You have your local people, and there's a sheriff there. He's an older man, and he's close with the Catwoman, who runs the brothel, and his deputy is Meg Foster, who's a cyborg. And what you then have is you have a group of people who are kind of like, who inevitably sort of end up being sort of the villains, but they don't like the sheriff and the way he's running town. And the guy who's the lead sort of this party, this group of people, is this guy named Red Eye, and he's kind of a lizard man. And he kind of challenges the sheriff to a duel at the very beginning of the film. And he ends up winning that duel, and the sheriff ends up dying. And that sort of starts the first film and the trajectory of the film, where the sheriff was a sort of a beloved town hero. And now you have this new guy who's killed him, and he's got this sort of gang of outliers and outsiders who live outside the city who are troublemakers. And the town is sort of in distress, if you will. And that's where the plot moves forward, where we find out the sheriff had a kind of a son who's sort of left town. He's called an empath, who's apparently has the ability to I guess like he can like feel people's emotions and things,
Right.
or whatever. And he's kind of been estranged, and essentially the story is about kind of him coming back to the town for various reasons and kind of getting reconnected with the people there, and then ultimately sort of trying to avenge his father's death. If we can kind of give a
he comes back for his dad's funeral, and one of the running gags, I thought it was hilarious. Maybe some people will just find it cheesy, but at the funeral hall, they have bingo night on Thursdays. Yeah. So during like the funeral, there's like people calling out bingo, like, you know, numbers and letters upstairs, and you hear it like during the funeral. And I thought that was hilarious. Honestly, I really loved that.
I did too, and it very clearly made the point that you were making, that they knew that this movie was not to be taken serious. Like, it was total just goofy fun. Like, hey, let's just have a good time with this. Let's make some jokes. It's more of a comedy, like you said. George Takei, I thought he was fun in it. It was very clear, like a lot of like
He plays like the local like doctor, dentist, inventor character, but he's also an alcoholic.
Right.
So like every scene he's in, he just steals the scene, and he's pretty funny.
Yeah, and then Isaac Hayes is kind of so they don't collect gold. There's another, I can't remember what it's called. There's some kind of substance that they're collecting that's valuable, that they mine for.
Some side of ore of some sort.
Yeah, I can look it up here and I'll tell you in a minute. But that comes up more in the second film. But Isaac Hayes is kind of like the guy who, when they find that substance, they go and they sell it, and he runs like a little shop, and he kind of like converts it and gives them money. So he was pretty good in it too. But overall, I thought it was a good cast of characters. It was fun. It was lighthearted. It definitely had a lot of good camp in it. I like the fact that it was low budget, you know, makeup and special effects. I love the fact that they did the stop motion animation monsters, which come back at the end as well. I don't want to totally give away the whole film, because I feel like this is a film that probably a lot of people haven't seen, and I do want to encourage them to actually go out and watch it. But here's the thing I want to say about this film and the second film, and then I'll briefly talk about the second film as well and give you a little bit of a synopsis of what that is about. I definitely see that Peter David, who wrote this, was a Star Trek guy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not only because people like George Takei appear in the film and he brings him on as a side character, but there's a very clear difference between Star Trek and Star Wars. Okay, and there's a certain tone and intentionality to the whole Star Trek genre of entertainment. And I was trying to think about this as I was watching these Oblivion movies and why it was that they felt so Star Trek-y, even though they clearly have a Western tinge to them and they kind of are their own things. And it gets back to the point that you were making at the beginning that I told you to pause, because I said, I'm going to have a talking point about this that I want to come back on. And you said, you had it on. It was on. And you kind of had it going. That is these films in their essence. And what I mean by that is this. And I feel like this is true of Star Trek, but I'm interested to get your point on this. Because when I was thinking about this, I thought, to me, the big difference between something like a Star Wars versus a Star Trek is this. And you know, there's some people who are out there who are Star Trek fans, and there's some people who are out there who are like hardcore Star Wars fans, and there's some people who are both. And you and I were all kind of both. We were pretty neutral.
Sure.
You know, if it was good, we liked it. And I feel like there's a lot of people, if you're a sci-fi fan, who probably fall into that camp as well. But to me, the main difference between those two things is this: when Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek originally, it was a television series. Okay, it wasn't a major motion picture. And I feel like what he was trying to generate or create was he was trying to create a fictional science fiction world. Okay, he was trying to create a cast of characters and to create kind of a world that had a feel to it. And then I feel like subsequently the stories kind of generated out of that world. So you create characters. You have Vulcan, you have Romulans, you have people who are cyborgs, and inevitably in their encounters with these people and these other beings, there's conflicts and there's problems, and each week they have to sort of deal with that. But it's not going to a certain end. There's not like a start and an end. It's just sort of life it's life happening in a world that's a unique sort of science fiction world, and they're dealing with real life issues and real life problems, and that's kind of what Star Trek is. Star Trek to me is what I would call a slow burn.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Now, Star Wars is very different, because when George Lucas created Star Wars, he, getting back to a point we were making previously, was a big fan of people like Akira Kurosawa and a lot of the Japanese samurai films, but he was pulling very much from sort of like mythology, like sort of Freudian, Jungian archetypal myths in psychology, where he was really creating a very, very strong sense of myth, classical myth. And he wanted to take those classical myths that we may take from Greek or Roman or wherever, and then put it, instead of in the ancient world, put it in a futuristic world of science fiction. And so, to me, Lucas started with a story first. He's like, I want to have a story about a family and the conflict between a father and a son and his children, and this sort of Oedipal thing and all this kind of stuff. And then from there, once he had that story there, that myth he wanted to tell, the universe unfolded. So essentially what I'm saying is that it's two different starting points. Lucas starts with having a clear start and finish, a story arc. From there, his world unfolds. Where I feel like Roddenberry wants to just create a whole world. And then within the world, the stories come about. Does that make sense?
It does. Here's my take on it, and I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. I think it probably still lines up, but George Lucas, I think Star Wars to him was his version of a samurai movie, his version of a Buck Rogers, if you will. I mean, A New Hope was episode 4. It was supposed to sort of give you the feel of like walking into one of those old, Buck Rogers or science fiction serials that he probably grew up watching, where you'd go into the movie theater and you'd see an episode of something, maybe having missed the beginning or one of the previous episodes, you're sort of walking into it in the middle. Mm-hmm. He was trying to create basically a B movie intentionally.
Yes.
And he and Steven Spielberg have worked together on a lot of things because they both sort of share that, idea. But I'm going to take this a different way. I'm gonna compare it to, and this is a tangent since we're on it already. I'm gonna compare it to Tolkien versus Lewis.
Oh wow, okay, that makes sense too. Yeah, but to me, those are the same types of things. It's the same type of comparison.
It's true. It's very true. It's very true. But just what you're saying made me really think about just now the fact that Tolkien, he created a language, right? He was a linguist. He created a language, he created mythology, he created a world, he created all of that, all of these details. He has writings that, have yet to probably even be released, just going into the details he created for the world, not even intending to publish these details, just to give the world more depth for him to draw on to write these books. And then you have Lewis, who wrote his Out of the Silent Planet, his space trilogy, which was really more just a fantastical fantasy, more poetic, more sort of just on the nose.
Yes.
Versus, this whole world. So I think that lines up exactly with what you're saying, but I'm not really sure how any of this ties to Oblivion, but you have a point, apparently, I believe.
I do, and I agree with what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, Lewis was very much making an allegory. He's like, I have a story I want to tell. And in his case, it was like Judeo-Christianity, right? So I'm just going to take that story and I'm going to tell it through a narrative of fiction. By creating this world of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe or whatever else. Tolkien was more about like, no, I just want to create a mythos. I want to create a British mythology. And he also had strong Judeo-Christian values. So inevitably, some of those themes leak into his storytelling. And yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think George Lucas wanted to create a very clear, like, I want to take this mythology that I know, and I want to like just take like literally like straight out of Freud, straight out of like Jungian archetypal psychology, classic mythology, and just put it in sci-fi. Whereas Roddenberry was like, no, I just want to create a science fiction world, and I want it to just sort of unfold from there. But yes, the point I'm making, to bring it back to Oblivion, and then we had these conversations because, one, I do feel like those genres of films were clearly very influential on this film. But two, we're never going to have a podcast on Band the Pod about either Star Trek. Well, there might be a few Star Trek movies we could include, but probably not
possible.
But probably not Star Trek or Star Wars. And so this gives us a platform to kind of have this conversation. But when you watch Oblivion and the sequel, I feel like it's very much like a Star Trek TV show or even one of the films, in the sense that there is a story going on, but it's not a complex story. I mean, really, like I said, I just gave you the plot in probably, 2 minutes? And you can pretty much predict where it's going to go. There's no real like big, cliffhangers or sharp turns or surprises. But that's not what this film is about. This film is about creating a world. It's about stepping into an imaginative sort of fictional world that's just fun. It's funny. It's light. It's got cool things in it like cyborgs and lizard people and stop motion animation monsters, and it's just fun. And you can just put it on and you can watch it, and you don't really have to invest in it in the sense of like being overly like absorbed, but not in a bad way, if that makes sense. And I feel that's its charm, and that was also its intention, and it was actually handled properly, and it was done successfully, even though it was a low-budget film. Does that make sense?
I think so. But I think it's only fair to compare it to, as someone who watched a lot of Star Trek, the original series of Star Trek. Probably Gene Roddenberry's original intent. Because certainly when you get deeper into the later Star Trek shows and movies, the thing that stands out about Star Trek is it does go so deep compared to Star Wars, which really doesn't seem to have any rules, or every movie they come out with, they change the rules.
That's true. No, that's a good point. No, like I mentioned, it definitely has like that 60s, like 50s, 60s
right.
kind of sci-fi feel, and I think
yes,
that was
I agree with
very,
that 100%.
very, very, very intentional. So just briefly, while we have a couple minutes left, I do want to just kind of talk about the second film. Again, I don't think we have to say a lot because I think we covered my point, which is it's a light film. It's a slow burn. You can throw it on. It's not a complicated plot. It's really more about the world. This is both of these films seem like they should have been comic series to me.
I think they actually made a comic book off of the film.
Well, that would make sense because it has that feel to it. But the second film, I don't know if you it's Zirconium is the substance.
Yeah.
It's kind of like their gold. So I'm just looking it up here now. I said I would. But in the second film, we have the character. Her name is Lash. She was in the first film. She was like the villainess. She was sort of the female companion / sidekick to the red-eyed character who was the main villain who killed the town sheriff. She's still around, as are the other cast of characters who we mentioned, but they're sort of living outside the main town. And she, in a poker match, wins these Draconian mines. And sure enough, she finds a lot of Draconium. I can't say it. And this is like the most valuable substance in this world. This is like what they're mining for. So it's a matter of kind of like people sort of, I don't know, vying for getting these mines, and her trying to control the rights to this and the wealth of this discovery. But there's also the side story of there's this new guy who's a bounty hunter who comes into town. His name's Sweeney. And he's supposed to be like the worst bounty, like most toughest, biggest, most badass bounty hunter.
Now, did you notice who that guy was that played Sweeney?
Yeah,
Because I noticed it took me a second. I'm like, who is this guy? And then immediately it clicked with me. Grease 2.
yeah, I had to look him up, but you're right. The actor who plays Sweeney. I'm trying to find him on here. I don't see him on. He's got to be in here somewhere. But yeah, he was if you've ever watched the film Grease 2 with Michelle Pfeiffer, he's the lead male. Maxwell Caulfield. He also played. He was also in the classic '90s film Empire Records.
That's right.
If you've seen that movie, he plays Rex Manning, who's kind of like he's like the pop, or like old school pop superstar who's coming to the record store to like do a signing, and he's like a total douchebag. But
I think it's important to mention that we watched Grease 2 a lot. We really did. I don't know why, but I feel like if you know that about us, it probably explains a lot of things. Growing up, we probably watched Grease 2 almost as much as the original Grease.
And we watched Caddyshack 2 more
That
than
was
the
where I
original
was going
Caddyshack.
next. We watched Caddyshack 2 probably more than the original. And in fact, I know it much better. And possibly Short Circuit 2.
I was going to bring that one up as well. Yep. We like
all bad sequels that for some reason we tended to focus on.
We loved them, and then we were like kind of shocked when we got older, and people were like, "No, I never watched. That was terrible." I'm like, wait, what? I love that movie. Yeah, we liked the bad movies back then, but you're right. Grease 2, we loved it. Isn't that the one with Let's Roll, Let's Rock and Roll? Did that have that song in it?
Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah. He was a motorcycle driving. But yeah, so he plays Sweeney, and of course, the joke is that he like the Sweeney bounty hunter is supposed to be like the most like terrifying, whatever, bounty hunter in the galaxy, and then he's this like suave, good-looking dude who kind of comes into town, is very charming. Although at the end of the film, a little bit of a spoiler, we find out he's basically just masked his appearance. He looks more like one of the dinosaurs from the old like 90s TV show Dinosaurs, if you remember.
Right.
the Jim Henson Dinosaurs TV
Right.
show. There's like kind of a CGI moment, but then he goes into the sort of rubber masks and prosthetics of being a sort of creature. But he's coming into town because there's this supposedly villainess, this woman who's this like really famed criminal who's uncatchable, and she constantly she's like a Thomas Crown or something, or like Sean Connery in The Rock, like this like person who's constantly like changing who they are and like can never be found. And rumor has it that she's on this outpost planet living, and he's come looking for her. And so the assumption is that when everyone hears that, he's looking for this sort of villainous female person, that it's this Lash character who's inherited the draconian minds. And so he's trying to pursue her, but of course, again, I won't go into I guess ruining the plot, since this is a film that probably very few people have seen. But the plot thickens a little bit, and there's some kind of twists and turns. But ultimately, again, these films are not really so much plot driven as much as they're character driven. They're more about scenery. They're more about setting. These are scenery, setting, and character driven stories, not plot driven stories.
And I feel like they're also driven by, let's try to set up as many like puns and kind of comedy moments as we can. And so it's sort of driven by like, let's set those moments up.
Yeah, and it was interesting that the entire cast came back for the second film. That says something.
Apparently they were actually filmed like at the back-to-back pretty much. They pretty much filmed them at the same time. They had the cast, they had the set. They just made both movies. So it was one of those kind of situations. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if you probably a lot of people have not seen these films. I would say, again, you can get it for free, at least the first one on Tubi, and it's kind of fun if you like bad movies. Like I said, it's a great like afternoon matinee film to just throw on. The director was a guy named Sam Irving, by the way. I think that's his second film. He looks like he did a lot of kind of lowbrow, kind of crappy B films. Oh no, he did the first one too. So it's the same director that did both films. and like we said, Peter David, he wrote both films as well. So and the entire cast is in there. But if you like westerns, if you like science fiction films, if you like things that are the kind of a combination of those, if you like the old campy '60s sci-fi films, the Ray Harryhausen stop motion stuff, I think I thought it was a fun movie. I don't know. I liked it. Not a great movie, I mean, but for what it was, I think it hit all the right notes. I think it knew exactly what it was, and it had a clear vision of where it was going and what it wanted to be, and I feel like it accomplished it. So
yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed watching it. I mean, it's one of those movies you can just sort of put on in the background and sort of catch. There's not a lot of plot to it, but just sort of keep it on and enjoy it. And I watched them both kind of back to back, and the second one I just was less interested in because it was pretty much just more of the same. But yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. I was glad that you had suggested this movie, or both of them, and I enjoyed watching them. So that's really all I have to say about this movie. I recommend at least watch the first one. It's worth your time. If you like bad movies, it's worth it. Do you have any other last thoughts before we sort of move on to the next?
The only thing I would say to close out was just if I had to describe these films in a word, which is kind of weird, but it'll make sense when I say it, I think, to you, calming. There's sort of a calming feel to it. It's not like I said, it's not an overcommitment. It's not overly complex. It kind of has a little bit of that nostalgia to it of like the 60s and the old Star Trek series. And there's a certain just kind of like, it's like a Norman Rockwell painting. It's not like good art, but it's just sort of, there's a sort of calming.
There's a comfort element to it.
Yeah, it's like there's comfort food, which isn't really good food. This is like a comfort movie.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's how I describe it.
So I'm going to propose something.
I'm ready.
I'm going to propose, we have a list of movies that we have watched that we think would be great to talk about during the podcast. Of course, we're always open to suggestions. Mm-hmm. I'm going to propose something. I'm not sure if we've done this before. I'm going to propose a movie that I don't think either of us have seen. Maybe you have by now.
Okay.
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm going to suggest it based on the title and the actor alone.
Oh,
it's
wow.
another full moon movie.
Okay.
It's a series that they've done, so I know it must have been popular enough for them to make a couple of these.
Okay, are we doing the whole series or just the one
I
film?
think maybe we'll just do the one, but we'll see how it goes. If we have time, maybe we can cover more than one movie.
Okay.
I'm going to suggest Ginger Dead Man.
With Gary Busey.
Gary Busey as some sort of killer gingerbread man. Have you seen it?
I have not seen it, but I have seen it on the Full Moon stream. And I think it's on Tubi as well. I
have not seen it either yet. But based on just, like I said, it's Gary Busey and it's a killer gingerbread man. Mm-hmm. It's definitely looks like a horror camp movie, which is right in my element. Mm. I'm going to suggest it sight unseen. We're going to do this. We're going to watch it. Mm-hmm. It might be horrible. It might be fantastic. Maybe you can go out and watch it for the first time as well. And then we'll tell you what we think of it. What do you think about that?
No, I think it's perfect because neither one of us have seen this one. I know it's on the Full Moon service. I'm pretty sure it's on Tubi. So if you have that free Tubi app, you can find it and watch it. But no,
it may be on Amazon Prime as well. So
great.
Look for that. I imagine you could get the DVD cheap too if it looks like something you really know that you're going to love. But just based on the name and the fact that it's Gary Busey playing this, like, I don't know, some sort of gingerbread man who goes around murdering people. I think we have to watch it. So
there's a whole ton of them like that, but I know that's one of the more popular titles. So good selection. Thank you for listening. We didn't go too much into these movies, but I think we had a great discussion on sci-fi and Peter David and Star Trek, and all those things are related, and it's our podcast, so we do what we want.
Yeah. As we like to say. So,
Yes. So thank you for listening or watching. If you are watching, if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, it is available, so you can see what we look like as we hold the microphone and stare at each other. And tell your friends,
Yeah. And we've been getting a fair number of views on YouTube, which is great. So I'm glad we're using that as an outlet. But if you are watching it and you want to subscribe to it or at least like the video, that's great. I mean, we're not making any money or anything like this. We're not even planning to, but at least gives us a little bit of feedback that, hey, people that are watching it did enjoy it, or, they like to see it on YouTube, because it does take a little bit extra time for us to do it that way. So let us know, post comments, subscribe. But of course, it's always going to continue to be a podcast. So if that's your preferred method of listening, we encourage that as well. So we'll be back with Ginger Dead Man, hopefully before too long.
I'm just going to show this bottle one more time.
Yeah.
Look at that.
That's pretty amazing.
We're going to come up with a Ginger Dead Man drink. That should be fun as well.
See, I think that will be perfect. Yes.
Yeah. There'll definitely be some good things you can do with that, for sure. So, all right. Well, the great suggestion, watch Ginger Dead Man, and we'll be back probably before you know it. We are the Bad Action Movie Brothers. This has been yet another episode of discussion on bad movies, on science fiction, on comic books. We kind of cover it all. We just, if you like those types of things, this is what we do.
We do what we want.
Yeah, but I feel like it's all connected in some ways, and I also feel like that's it's kind of fun, to just to talk
Mix
about some of these side-lying things that maybe we wouldn't normally discuss. So, all right, well, thank you for listening, and we will, like we said, we'll be back. All right,
we will be back. Bye.